Today we take a look back at the complete history of the earliest science fiction-related comic strips and characters published in the comic book format, starting in 1933 with the modern comic book format. The first serious science fiction series ever published anywhere, and perhaps the most important of all time, is Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers is also number one, the first science fiction-related character and strip published in the modern comic book format. Over 400 comic book appearances over the next 80 years and a continuous monthly run in Famous Funnies began with the first appearance in comics in Famous Funnies number 3, dated October 1934. Buck Rogers is a fictional space opera character created by Philip Francis Nolan in his novella Armageddon 2419 AD. The strip Buck Rogers made its first newspaper appearance on January 7, 1929. Later adaptations include a film serial, a TV series, and other formats. The first appearance in Famous Funnies number 3 from 1934 features a 4-page story written by Philip Francis Nolan with art by Rick Yeager under the alias of Dick Calkins. This is the first science fiction-related story published in comic books, and is the first comic book appearance of Buck Rogers. These are, in fact, Sunday pages that do not start at the beginning of the strip or even at a particular storyline. Number 2. The second science fiction-related strip ever published in comics is Don Drake. Don Drake makes its debut in New Fun number 1, February 1935, from DC Comics. This would also be the first comic book science fiction comic cover ever used in New Fun Comics number 3, featuring Don Drake on the cover. The first Don Drake appearance is in a 1-page story written by Ken Fitch with art by Clemens Greder. The sci-fi story also features Sword and Sorcery, first appearances of Don Drake and Betty, and is later reprinted in the Big Book of Fun Comics from November 1935, also at DC Comics. The character Don Drake would make 22 appearances in DC Comics from 1935 to 1938, including New Fun Comics, More Fun Comics, Big Book of Fun Comics, and New Book of Comics. Number 3. 2023 Super Police. Debuting in New Fun number 1, February 1935 from DC Comics, this strip would make 18 appearances at DC in 1935 and 1936. The debut appearance is a 1-page comic story written by Ken Fitch with art by Clemens Greder. The sci-fi story features the first appearances of Rex, Professor Shanley, and Joan Shanley. Number 4. Strange Adventures of Mr. Weed. This interesting sci-fi story was written and drawn by Sheldon Mayer, featuring the characters Oliver Weed, Uriah Moucher, and Fritz. The first appearance was in New Comics number 1, dated November 1935. The strip would appear in 4 issues in a row, plus one later reprint. The first appearance is a 4-page story of Strange Adventures of Mr. Weed by Sheldon Mayer. Number 5. Flash Gordon. First appearing in the comic book format in King Comics number 1, dated April 1936, would go on to appear in over 2,000 comics published worldwide. Flash Gordon is the hero of a space opera adventure comic strip created and originally drawn by Alex Raymond. First published at January 7, 1934, the strip was inspired by and created to compete with the already popular Buck Rogers adventure strip. The first appearance in comics in King Comics number 1 features a 4-page story written by Don Moore with art by Alex Raymond. Characters include Flash Gordon, Dale Arden, and Hans Zarkov, and these are reprinted from the Flash Gordon Sundays from the King Features Syndicate, dated September 1st through September 22nd, 1935. Number 6. Brick Bradford. First appearing in King Comics number 1, April 1936 from David McKay Publications, would go on to have 299 American comic book appearances. Brick Bradford was a sci-fi comic strip created by writer William Ritt, a journalist based in Cleveland, and artist Clarence Gray. First distributed in 1933 by Central Press Association. Brick Bradford increasingly featured fantastic elements in the manner of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. Brick Bradford now became more of a space opera adventure story with tales of dinosaurs, lost civilizations, intergalactic villains, robots, and subatomic worlds. On April 20th, 1935, the strip added a time machine, the Time Top, that traveled to both past and future. The first appearance in King Comics #1 is a 4-page story written by William Britt with art by Clarence Gray, and is reprinted from the Brick Bradford Sundays at the King Features Syndicate, dated September 1st through September 22nd, 1935. Number 7. Stratosphere Special. First debuting in New Comics #4, April 1936 at DC Comics. The first appearance is a 2-page story written and drawn by Serene Summerfield. This is the first appearance of the strip. And Serene Summerfield, born in 1885, was one of the early females to work with original comic artwork. Her first known comics work was a 2-page sci-fi story titled Stratosphere Special, appearing in New Comics #4. The second and last installment appeared in the next issue, New Comics #5. She then took the concept to Henley Publications as the near-identical Space Limited Above the Stratosphere, which was published in Wow, What a Magazine, starting with issue #1. There are only 2 appearances of this strip at DC Comics. Number 8, Don Dixon and the Hidden Empire. This strip debuted in Popular Comics #6, July 1936, published by Dell Comics, in a 1-page story written by Bob Moore with art by Carl Pfeiffer. In total, the Don Dixon strip would appear in 62 comics from 1936 to 1943, first debuting at Dell Comics. Number 9, Mark Marson of the Interplanetary Police. First debuting in More Fun Comics #15, November 1936 from DC Comics. This strip would make 20 comic appearances, primarily from 1936 through 38 at DC. The debut story, People of the Red Planet Part 1, is a 2-page story written and drawn by Tom Hickey, featuring the debut of the characters Mark Marson, Monty Montago, Sarno, and Hillary's daughter. It is later reprinted in Warrior Comics from H.C. Blackerby Comics, dated 1945. Number 10, Rod Ryan of the Sky Police. Debuting originally in Wags, the UK edition from Editor's Press Service, dated January 1st, 1937, had its first regular American distribution in The Comics #6, February 1938, from Dell Comics. The debut appearance is a 1-page story written by Paul Jepson. The sci-fi story would go on to have 19 comic appearances from 1937 to 1940. In fact, in 1940, the title was taken over at DC Comics and appeared in every issue of Flash Comics #2 through 11. Number 11, Dan Hastings. Debuting in Star Comics #1, dated February 1937. The debut story is 4 pages, written by Ken Fitch with art by Clem Gretter. The early sci-fi story would have 45 appearances in comics from 1937 through 1953 at Centaur Comics and later at Archie Comics. Number 12, Bob Steele. Debuting in Funny Picture Stories #6 from Comics Magazine, April 1937. The first story is a lengthy 7-page strip written and drawn by George Brenner. The Bob Steele strip would only have 2 appearances in comics in 2 different issues of Funny Picture Stories. Number 13, Jack Strand. Debuting in Funny Picture Stories, Volume 2, Number 1, dated September 1937, from Ultim Comics, which would go on to become Centaur Publications. The first appearance is in Jack Strand, a 7-page story with art by Frank Frollo. The writer is unknown. This early sci-fi story would go on to have 16 appearances in comics from 1937 to 1940, and the first appearance features the characters Jack Strand, Diana, Homer Carlin, and the villain Psyche. Of special note, Popular Comics #28 at this time released a 2-page text story of Son of the Minutemen, written by Sam Merwin Jr., who would go on to become a famous science fiction writer the next year in the pulp Thrilling Wonder Stories. Number 14, Space Hawks. Only 1 appearance ever in comics of Space Hawks by creator, writer-artist Basil Wolverton. This was in fact his first comic book published work. In 1938 in Circus the Comic Riot #1, June 1938 from Globe Syndicate. The two-page story would be reworked and relaunched in 1940 under the name Space Hawk. Number 15, Superman. Debuting June 1938 in Action Comics #1 from DC Comics. Superman would start a new trend of popular superheroes that would cross over with science fiction elements, Superman being an alien himself. Superman would go on to appear in 1,000 different American comic book series, be featured in over 11,000 American comic book issues, and have 43,000 stories published in American comic books. Only Batman has been published in more comics. Superman is a fictional superhero appearing in American comic books published by DC, the character created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster, high school students living in Cleveland, Ohio. They sold Superman to Detective Comics, the future DC Comics, in 1938. Superman debuted in Action Comics #1 and eventually appeared in newspaper strips, TV programs, films, and video games. With this success, Superman helped to create the superhero archetype and establish its primacy within the American comic book. At this point, there would be a hefty overlap of superhero and science fiction elements in comic books, which we now call the Golden Age of comics.